The first breath of midsummer lay upon the countryside, heavy with the perfume of roses and the shimmering heat of June. Rosewood Manor, a dignified estate of honey-colored stone, basked in the late afternoon sun, its windows glinting with golden fire. The lawns, rolling down in perfect symmetry toward the ornamental lake, were alive with white marquees, strings of bunting, and the hum of polite conversation. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe's garden fete was an event of long tradition, the sort of gathering where county families mingled with local gentry, where gossip rustled as freely as the leaves, and where reputations might be bolstered, or undone, in the span of a teacup's emptying. For 50 years, Lady Eleanor had presided over her fate with a regal air, her iron-gray hair arranged in stately coils, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had outlived a husband, survived 2 wars, and steered her household with a hand both imperious and precise. To outward appearances, everything at Rosewood Manor was perfectly ordered. The croquet lawns gleamed, the roses bloomed in crimson profusion, the cucumber sandwiches were thin and precise. Yet beneath the elegance ran a current of unease, like a faint dissonant note in a chamber quartet. Colonel Arbuthnot, red-faced and retired, was heard lamenting in the shade of the lime trees. "Damnable business," he muttered to his companion, though precisely what business he referred to was left delicately unspecified. His companion, Mr. Geoffrey Lytton, a young barrister with a pale, intellectual face, replied only with a thin smile, as if savoring some private amusement. Elsewhere, Miss Beatrice Hale, Lady Eleanor's niece, flitted about in a gown of pale lavender. Her laughter rang a shade too loudly, her eyes too bright. More than one guest noted that her fingers trembled when she accepted a glass of champagne. Some whispered that Beatrice's London escapades were becoming a subject of disapproval in the county. Others said that she had quarreled violently with her aunt only a week prior. On the far edge of the lawn, near the rose pergola, stood Dr. Edmund Rathbone, the village physician. His tall frame and hawk-like features gave him an air of severity. He conversed with Miss Clara Sims, the new companion to Lady Eleanor, a timid young woman with downcast eyes. Their conversation seemed curiously weighted, Clara blushing and Edmund speaking in tones both urgent and subdued. The gardener, James Wilcox, moved silently among the roses, his hands calloused and his manner taciturn. A man of few words, Wilcox's loyalty to Rosewood was said to be absolute. Yet there was a bitterness to his gaze when it lingered on the young niece, Beatrice, or on Dr. Rathbone. One might have thought his hands could snap the stems of roses as easily as he pruned them. At the center of it all, like a queen bee in her hive, Lady Eleanor presided from a white wrought-iron chair, issuing commands with a flick of her hand, receiving homage in the form of curtsies, bows, and carefully measured compliments. It was just as the string quartet, tucked discreetly under a pavilion, began the opening bars of a waltz that the moment came. Lady Eleanor rose with a champagne flute, and her guests obligingly gathered. "My friends," she declared, her voice strong despite her years, "to health, to friendship, and to the eternal beauty of summer." The glasses lifted, and the golden liquid sparkled in the sun. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The scent of roses, heady and almost oppressive, hung in the air. Yet to the trained eye, had one been there to notice, 2 details were incongruous. First, a solitary bloom of dark red had been slipped into the pale arrangement on the table, where all others were soft pink. Second, as Lady Eleanor drank deeply of her glass, Miss Beatrice's laughter ceased abruptly, and her hand gripped the stem of her glass until her knuckles blanched. The fete continued with apparent gaiety, but the note of dissonance deepened. Lady Eleanor seated herself once more, her expression unreadable. Some said later that her hand trembled as she set the glass down. As the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthened across the lawns. The air, rich with a mingled scents of roses, champagne, and cut grass, seemed heavy, almost suffocating. The fete would be remembered for its gaiety, yes, but also for something else. For though the guests did not yet know it, beneath the laughter and the sparkle of crystal glasses, death had already taken its place among them. And soon, though none could imagine it yet, the name of Hercule Poirot would be spoken in hushed, expectant tones at Rosewood Manor. At precisely 20 minutes past 5, when the heat of the afternoon slackened and the rooks drifted homeward above the elms, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe rose from her white chair and inclined her head to the string quartet. A graceful diminuendo obeyed her and gave way to the crisp pop of a champagne cork. The sound, light as a pistol at a garden wedding, rippled through the assembled guests, and faces turned instinctively toward the refreshments table that had been arranged beneath the rose pergola. The pergola itself was a triumph of symmetry, pale pink climbing roses braided through white latticed wood, their petals blown across the linen in a sugared drift. Yet amidst that pallor there stood a single crimson bloom, dark as a clot of wine, slipping like a drop of blood into the pastel arrangement. It had not been there earlier. Several ladies, whose eye for domestic order was as keen as any general's, would swear to that later. But at 5:20, when the first flute was placed into Lady Eleanor's gloved hand, the red note thrummed in the bouquet. A footman, William, a compact fellow with sandy hair and the precise movements of a clock, held the silver tray level and steady as a spirit level. To his right, a second servant, a dark-eyed girl from the village called Molly, steadied the bottle within its collar of folded napkin. William's tray held 12 flutes. One, near the rim, had its stem wrapped with a tiny length of narrow ribbon, a dainty loop the color of pale lilac. "For her ladyship," Molly murmured, and the ribboned glass passed to Lady Eleanor's hand like a ritual object. No one made more than a joke of the ribbon. Lady Eleanor was famous for her little systems. "It saves confusion," she had been heard to say. "And confusion is the cradle of error." She took the flute, held it aloft, and the crowd arranged itself about her with the kind of ceremonial instinct that attends any matriarch when she means to bless. A hush fell, broken only by a child's suppressed giggle and the dry click of cicadas in the longer grasses beyond the croquet lawn. "My friends," Lady Eleanor said, and her voice, trained by decades of charity bazaars and committees, carried without strain, "to health, to constancy, to the roses of England which remind us that beauty is rarely unarmed." It was a curious closing phrase. She smiled, as if to soften it, and drank deeply. I was standing, if I may speak plainly of my position, for I was there, some 10 paces off, beneath the shade of a lime tree with Colonel Arbuthnot. I had come down to Rosewood for the weekend at the Colonel's invitation. He had, it seemed, a niece of his own to marry off and a general matchmaking disposition that will seize upon any bachelor, friend or passer-by. The Colonel grunted approval of the champagne. "Proper stuff," he said. "None of your post-war thinness. See how it frosts the glass, like a good horse, eh? Sound." It was at 5:23 that Lady Eleanor set down her glass and turned to acknowledge a compliment from Mrs. Iris Vale, a handsome woman whose black hair made a striking hat unnecessary. The sun gilded the rims and threw the shadows of the pergola in a neat lattice upon the table linen. At 5:25 she put her hand to her throat. I have seen, in my time, the many ways in which trouble first declares itself, an expression that goes slack, a sharpened breath, the inexplicable sway of a body that moments before was anchored by health and habit. Lady Eleanor's gesture was small, almost girlish. Her fingers sought the clasp of the pearl necklace she always wore, and her lips formed the beginning of a word. The flute, still a third full, tilted. A single thread of champagne slipped down the side of the glass like a traveling insect and fell to the linen. "Eleanor," said Mrs. Vale, gently. The timbre had changed in the crowd. Conversation thinned to those small, crisp sounds one hears in a drawing-room when a servant enters with a letter. Breaths being held, the rearrangement of a skirt upon a chair, someone's careless laugh dying away into nothing. Lady Eleanor's face had altered. Not much, but enough to make the line of her mouth cruel, as if the features were contracting inward. She sat. Nearer the pergola, Miss Beatrice Hale stood with a champagne flute in each hand. She had been demonstrating something to her cousin Geoffrey Lytton. How the bubbles clung to the etched pattern on the glass, perhaps. I recall the little laugh and the light in her eye. Now she seemed to forget the second glass entirely. She set it down carelessly, clumsily even, so that it rang against the tray, and then she pressed her hand flat against her own bodice as if to quiet a flutter of the heart. "Air," Lady Eleanor managed. "It is hot." Dr. Edmund Rathbone was upon her at once, his hawkish face intent but controlled. He had the manner of a man who commanded his nerves to stillness the way other men command dogs. Deep breaths, Lady Ashcombe. William, fetch water. Molly, the smelling salts from the hall table. Clara, this to the companion, Miss Clara Sims, who looked as if she would faint on the spot from the horror of being addressed. A cushion. Quickly. The quartet faltered and stopped. In the pause, the countryside seemed suddenly enormous. The flies loud, the distant train from Ashcombe halt a thin thread of sound across the fields. Colonel Arbuthnot's face had gone curiously blank. like that of a man who sees a cavalry charge forming in a mist and cannot yet discern which way it runs. At 5:28, Lady Eleanor tried to rise. She could not. A tremor passed over her. The gloved hand that had raised the toast now clutched at the arm of the chair with a strength that drew the knuckles white. "It burns," she said, surprising me. The voice was little more than a rasp, yet the words were distinct. Mrs. Vale, bending, drew back sharply. "Her skin," she said, looking at Dr. Rathbone in a curious, almost challenging way, "is cold." "Inside," said Dr. Rathbone, and for the first time his control seemed to waver. "We must have her inside. William, Colonel, take the arms." Gently. They lifted her. The pearls snapped as they rose. The sound was minute, like hail on glass, and the beads scattered over the lawn. Molly, with an odd, superstitious cry, let the smelling salts fall, and the tiny silver lid spun against a chair leg. We went in. I am, if I may confess it, a sentimentalist in certain matters. The sight of an old lady in distress moves me. I had known Lady Eleanor only a few hours, but the dignity of her person, the command of her household, were evident. In the cool twilight of the great hall, her breath rasped. She murmured something. I thought it was Petals, but perhaps that was fancy, the trick of a mind already preoccupied with the roses. At 5:33, in the long drawing-room with its Adam fireplace and ranks of miniatures, Dr. Rathbone knelt and placed his ear against Lady Eleanor's breast. His hands were deft, almost delicate. He sent Clara for his bag. "Sublingual," he said, half to himself, half to the air, and slipped a tablet under the tongue. "If it is the heart." "Is it the heart?" asked Mrs. Vale, with a composure that I did not, even then, quite credit. "She has had no attacks, to my knowledge." "Silence," said the doctor, more sharply than before. We watched the small rise and fall of Lady Eleanor's breast. It seemed to labor, as if the air of the room, despite its coolness, were a weight upon her. Beatrice had come in and stood behind a chair, her fingers digging into the wood until the nails blanched. Geoffrey Lytton took a pace toward her and then, as if reconsidering, stood back with his hands behind his back, in the posture of a barrister awaiting a witness who may or may not prove friendly. At 5:41, Lady Eleanor gave a small, sudden exhalation, as if letting go not only of breath but of will. Her body relaxed. I saw, with that clarity that sometimes attends dreadful moments, the pearl clasp still caught beneath the chair arm, a broken loop of milky beads resting in the shadow. Dr. Rathbone's face, when he raised it, was at once impersonal and grave. "She is gone," he said. "There is a way a room receives the news of death. It is not unlike the way a church receives a prayer. Something inward alters. The space becomes at once larger and more fragile, as if the walls themselves had taken a breath they were afraid to release." Clara Sims began to weep in small, stifled sobs that made no impression either upon Mrs. Vale, who had taken a chair and folded her hands serenely upon her lap, or upon Beatrice, whose eyes were fixed not upon her aunt but upon the door, as if awaiting an arrival. "Colonel Arbuthnot," said Dr. Rathbone, "would you telephone the police? Naturally, we must do what is proper." "Sudden death. You mean—" The colonel halted. He was a soldier and disliked to put horrors into words unnecessarily. "Do you suspect?" "I suspect nothing. I record facts." His voice was curt now, almost brutal. Lady Ashcombe drank one glass of champagne. She had taken tea an hour earlier. She complained of burning, yet her extremities were cold. There is no apparent trauma. Her tongue— He glanced down and compressed his lips. "We will wait for the police." The colonel went. The household, those parts of it that were permitted, collecting by degrees at the door. The butler, Mr. Priestley, a figure of bronze dignity. The housemaid in her apron, eyes wide as saucers. James Wilcox, the gardener, with soil still in the lines of his hands. He stood rather farther into the room than the others, as if by old right the domestic staff granted him a peculiarly intimate place near their mistress's person. "You were not on the lawn, Wilcox," said Priestley in a low, censorious tone. "I were among the roses." The gardener's eyes went to the window, to the shimmer of the pergola beyond. His face, weathered as leather, showed nothing save perhaps a shade of contempt for Priestley's politesse. "Where I belong." "At such a time," said Priestley, pained. "Very well." But he did not, I think, miss the detail any more than I did. At 5:49, the colonel returned to say that Inspector Leeming from the county station would be there at once, and that a doctor's certificate of death could not be issued until the police were satisfied. Regulations, he added, with a soldier's resignation to the inevitable curse of paperwork. Damn silly, but there it is. Not silly, Dr. Rathbone said. Necessary. Are you implying poison? Mrs. Vale's tone was mild. It was her face that betrayed her, for beneath the mildness there was a glint, like sun on a blade, of anticipation. I imply nothing. The doctor turned to Molly, who hovered at the threshold like a child caught out after lights out. Where is the bottle from which you poured her ladyship's glass? In the bucket, sir, Molly whispered, eyes enormous. The first bottle, the good one Mr. Priestley kept back for the toast. Mr. Priestley said as how the second is for the guests, and the first for her ladyship, begging your pardon, sir, and the colonel and that. She gestured vaguely toward the public. And the glasses, the tray, still on the lawn, sir. Do not touch them, said Dr. Rathbone, almost fiercely. You understand me. No one is to touch them. Priestley, see to it. Sir. The butler inclined his head. I have already arranged for the area to be kept clear. A small, cool voice came from the corner. We had better note the time for the inspector. Geoffrey Lytton took out a thin gold watch. Her ladyship drank at 5:20. At 5:25 she complained. At 5:41 she died. He said it calmly, as if dictating a memorandum. I will set these down. Beatrice turned on him. Must everything be reduced to lines and figures? The words came sharp, and then faltered. Forgive me. She folded her arms tight across her waist, and the next words were almost to herself. A ribbon on a glass. How absurd. What? I asked, for though she had spoken softly, the phrase snagged at some corner of my mind. A ribbon, she repeated, lifting her chin with an effort that suggested defiance was easier than grief. Molly tied a tiny ribbon round Aunt Eleanor's glass. She always does. Aunt liked to be sure of her own. No one else to touch it. Confusion is the cradle of error, she would say. Her mouth twisted, though whether at the phrase or at the memory one could not tell. Who suggested the ribbon? Asked Mrs. Vale very gently. Beatrice frowned, as if the question were a personal impertinence. No one suggests to Aunt Eleanor. She commands or she forbids. Indeed. Mrs. Vale's lashes lowered. The gardener had moved nearer the window. He stood with his back a little apart, a man temporarily freed from the theater of grief by the blunt demands of the physical world. A smear of green ran along his palm where, by old habit, he had wiped a blade or a stem. Roses, he said, not to us, but perhaps to the afternoon itself. And someone's been meddling. My attention swung to him. Meddling. He nodded toward the pergola. That dark un. Not mine. Not from that bed. Wouldn't mix, M. Bad form. Is the choice of a flower murder? Geoffrey Lytton murmured, not displeased by his own neatness. Sometimes, said Dr. Rathbone, unexpectedly. He had risen and was washing his hands in the small basin Clara had brought, using a serious, almost surgical thoroughness. Certain plants, Mr. Lytton, are not fit company at table. Beatrice shivered. The way you say it. Facts, the doctor said again, but without annoyance now. His eyes had settled on the empty champagne flute upon the side table near the door, the one Beatrice had set down in haste when her aunt faltered. He went to it, bent, and drew a fingertip along the rim. He lifted the finger toward his face, thought better of it, and instead sniffed lightly. An expression, complicated and not at all reassuring, passed over his features. He glanced up, and I saw him make a mental note of the position of the glass in relation to the chair and the door. Leave that as it is, he said to me, for I had taken an involuntary step. Everything in its place. His eyes flicked to Beatrice. You drank from this? Yes. I had 2 glasses. I mean, one and then another, because Geoffrey, she stopped. Color rose in her cheeks. It is nothing. Nothing, repeated Geoffrey Lytton, as if testing the word. He looked not at Beatrice but at Mrs. Vale, and something passed there that I did not, at the time, interpret. Footfalls sounded in the hall. Serious, official footfalls. Inspector Leeming entered, a square, sandy man with eyes that had more patience than warmth. He listened while the colonel summarized. He bowed over Lady Eleanor with a respectful, unfeigned gravity that did him credit. Then he looked toward the windows, the sweep of the lawn, the pergola beyond bleached by the lowering sun. "Very good," said the inspector at last. "We will treat the lawn as a scene. Mr. Priestley, if you please, rope off the pergola area and the refreshments table. No one is to cross the ropes except at my direction. Doctor, your assistance will be invaluable. Colonel, if I may trouble you for the telephone again." He paused. "We will remove her ladyship only when the county surgeon has seen her." "And in the meantime?" asked Mrs. Vale. "In the meantime," said Inspector Leeming, "we preserve what can be preserved." He turned to Molly. "You poured from the first bottle for the toast?" "Yes, sir." "And then the second for the guests?" "Yes, sir." A pause, then, "Except her ladyship, sir. She always had the first." "Always," murmured Geoffrey Lytton. "How comforting it is to be habitual." Leeming's eye sharpened. "There was a ribbon on the glass." Molly nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. So as to know. I put it there. Miss Beatrice said as how." "I said nothing of the sort," Beatrice flared. "I simply asked whether you had tied it. Aunt Eleanor likes to be sure." She stopped and pressed her fingers hard to her temples. "This is monstrous. Must we pick over every phrase?" "We must," said Leeming, without unkindness. "And we will." His gaze roved. "You, sir." He had addressed me. "You are." "Captain Hastings," I said, coming forward. "A guest. I was on the lawn at the time." "Very good. I may want your recollection of positions and movements." "People remember positions, Captain. They remember who was to the left of whom, and who set down a glass where, and who trembled. They forget words, but not arrangements. Curious, isn't it?" He smiled very briefly. "Perhaps it is that memory prefers a map to a sermon." To that, I had no clever reply. But as he spoke of maps, my own mind drew one: the pergola with its white lattice and its single dark bloom, the tray of 12 flutes, one ribboned, William's steady hand, Molly's neat pour, Lady Eleanor, central, the light playing over the pearls that would break a quarter-hour later, Beatrice 2 paces right, with Lytton attentive, Mrs. Vale directly left, head inclined, Dr. Rathbone 3 strides behind, already in readiness, as men whose profession lives on the border of calamity often. At the fringe, the gardener Wilcox in shadow, the companion Clara Sims hovering like a thin exclamation point by the chair backs, Colonel Arbuthnot muttering to me about sound horses and good froth. Inspector Leeming made his preliminary circuit, a man whose solid tread reassured as much as any prayer. He paused at the window. "Roses," he said, half to himself, "and one that does not belong." He looked at Wilcox. "Yours?" "No," said the gardener. "Not from that bed." Leeming nodded. He did not smile. "Then we will find from which it came. In a house such as this, gentlemen and ladies, everything has its place. When an object is out of place, it has a story to tell." He turned back to Lady Eleanor. "And we will hear it." Outside, the light had shifted toward evening. The pergola cast longer shadows like prison bars across the lawn. Someone, with a thought for piety or for appearances, drew the lace curtain half across the tall windows. It made a delicate veil through which the ordered kingdom of rosewood blurred into suggestion. Priestley murmured to the housemaid, who vanished and reappeared with a coverlet that was white, and pure, and ordinary. They laid it across Lady Eleanor's body with hands that were slow and reverent. In such ways the world continues its arrangements. The dead are covered, the living assemble their alibis, and the clock above the mantel, indifferent to tragedy, ticks on with a little brass heartbeat. It was at 6:03, while Leeming was dispatching a constable to guard the gates lest the early departures take with them their recollections and their guilt, that I heard, somewhere far off on the road, the purr of a motor car, precise and dignified, very unlike the farmer's lorry or the colonel's enthusiastic but unreliable Bentley. I cannot say why the sound gave me comfort. Perhaps it was merely that it spoke of order, of the neat, deliberate movement of a machine tended by a fastidious hand. I did not then know how often I had heard that motor, nor with what associations of dainty mustaches, patent leather shoes, and an intelligence that enjoyed nothing so well as an elegant puzzle wrought by human folly. I only know that the thought which came to me, as Lady Eleanor lay beneath her snow-white coverlet and the roses outside shed their petals like small, resigned sighs, was an irrational one, and yet, somehow, exactly right. If only, I thought, Poirot were here. The clock ticked on, the shadows lengthened, and the inspector set to his work among the glasses. On the linen below the pergola, in a patch of sun the curtain's fretwork could not dull, a single crimson petal, whether by storm of breeze or by some human agency, had drifted to rest beside a ring of moisture made by a champagne flute. It lay there, improbable and theatrical, as if stage-managed by the afternoon itself. No one touched it. Not yet. It would wait for the man who liked, as he said, to place each little fact in order until the pattern showed itself with a perfection almost mathematical. And still, in the room where the old lady lay in the hush that follows the last breath, the faintest odor hung, neither the harsh almond one imagines when one imagines murder, nor the clean bitterness of spirits, but something subtler, a memory of crushed green, of meadow sap and the bitterness you taste if you bite a stem to free it from the thorn. Outside, among the roses, the gardener stood unmoving, and the red bloom burned steadily in the pale sea like a warning light on a calm that could not last. It was the following morning when the storm truly broke. Rosewood Manor lay beneath a gauze of pale mist, the lawns damp with dew, and the roses heavy-headed as if they too grieved. The fete, with its chatter and champagne, seemed like a scene from some forgotten play. In its place was a household subdued, each figure whispering, each movement deliberate, as though afraid to offend the solemn air of death. Inspector Leeming had ordered the drawing-room sealed. Lady Eleanor's body remained there through the night, awaiting the coroner. Constables guarded both the pergola and the lawn, their boots leaving awkward tracks on the gravel paths. A hush fell whenever one of them passed. The sound of authority in such a setting was as jarring as a bugle at a funeral. At 9:30, a motor car approached the gates. Unlike the noisy Bentleys or muddy lorries to which the villagers were accustomed, this was a sleek vehicle, polished to mirror brightness, its movement deliberate, almost ceremonious. From it descended a man of modest height but unmistakable presence. His black mustaches were waxed to perfection, his shoes gleamed, his spats were immaculate. He carried a cane not from necessity but from a sense of proportion. He paused at the gates, surveyed the estate with a discerning eye, and then advanced with the precision of a clock hand. "Hercule Poirot," murmured Colonel Arbuthnot when he caught sight of him from the steps. His exclamation carried both relief and surprise. "By Jove, Hastings, did you know he was in the district?" "I had not. I confess, my heart gave a leap at the sight of him." "Poirot, what brings you here?" I exclaimed as he ascended the stone steps with his characteristic neatness. He inclined his head to me with grave courtesy. "Mon ami Hastings. And you also, Colonel. I regret deeply that it is under circumstances so triste." His eyes, green-gray and intensely alert, rested a moment on the darkened drawing-room windows. "It is the death of Lady Ashcombe which brings me. I was to visit her, not for the fete, non, but because of a small matter concerning her late husband's affairs. A favor asked by a friend in Brussels, many years past. I had written that I should call this very week. Instead, I learn in the village that she has died suddenly, and, how do you say, suspiciously. It is a duty, you comprehend, to present myself." Leeming, who had emerged from the hall with the briskness of a man already deep in responsibility, regarded him cautiously. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. But this is a police matter." "Mais naturellement," Poirot replied, spreading his hands. "You are the law, you conduct the inquiry. I am but a private citizen. Yet, if my little grey cells may be of service, eh bien, I offer them." The inspector hesitated, as so many of his profession have done when first encountering Poirot. But already, in the set of Leeming's shoulders and the respectful manner in which the constables regarded the foreigner, I saw resignation. Poirot had that effect. He slipped into an investigation not by force but by inevitability. "Very well," Leeming said at last. "Your assistance would be welcome, so long as it does not impede the official proceedings." Poirot inclined his head, as if a treaty had been signed. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with unease. The household had gathered in the morning room, ostensibly for breakfast, though little food had been eaten. Beatrice Hale sat by the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her pale face turned toward the mist outside. Dr. Rathbone stood stiffly by the mantel, his eyes unreadable. Mrs. Iris Vale, in black silk, poured herself coffee with an air of faint amusement. Clara Sims, the companion, kept to the shadows, her eyes red-rimmed. The servants hovered, subdued but curious. James Wilcox, the gardener, was absent, though it was said he had been at work among the roses since dawn. Poirot entered with a bow. Mesdames et messieurs, I am Hercule Poirot. Permit me to express my condolences. The death of Lady Ashcombe, it is a tragedy. All eyes turned to him. A ripple passed through the company, as though something inevitable had arrived. Mrs. Vale set down her cup with a delicate click. So the famous detective graces us. How very fortunate. Poirot's eyes lingered on her a moment. Fortunate, madam? Ah, perhaps. But when there is death, fortune is not the word. It is order we seek. Yes, order out of the chaos. He clasped his hands neatly. Permit me a few small questions, Inspector? Leeming nodded. Poirot's eyes moved swiftly across the room, missing nothing. Mademoiselle Hale, he began, you were near your aunt when she raised her glass? Beatrice started, her cheeks flushing. Yes, I was. I stood beside her. And you saw the ribbon about her glass? Yes. Aunt Eleanor always had it tied, so there could be no mistake. It was her way. Poirot inclined his head. Exact. Methodical. It is good. And who tied this ribbon? Molly, the maid, stepped forward nervously. I did, sir. Just as always. Bon. Poirot smiled gently. It is of interest only, you understand. Now, Dr. Rathbone, you were quick to attend. The physician nodded curtly. Naturally. I was present, I acted at once. But it was hopeless. Poison, it must have been. A small murmur ran through the room at his bluntness. Poirot raised a finger delicately. Perhaps, doctor. But let us not hurry, n'est-ce pas? One does not leap to conclusions. One allows the facts to take their proper place. Facts, Rathbone said stiffly, will show you what I have already seen. Poirot only smiled. Later, when we walked together upon the dew-silvered lawn, Poirot surveyed the roped pergola with its discarded glasses. The single crimson rose glowed darkly among the pale blossoms. He bent, examined it closely, and his brows drew together. Regard, Hastings, he murmured. The bloom, it does not belong here. It is from another bed entirely. Someone placed it with care. It is a signal, perhaps, or a signature. A rose, I said incredulously. Surely that is fanciful, Poirot. He straightened, brushing a speck of dust fastidiously from his sleeve. Fanciful, mon ami? None. The English, they love their symbols, their little gestures. To you, perhaps it is only a flower. To me, it is the voice of the murderer, whispering, "See, I am clever." I stared at the roses, shivering despite the morning sun. Already Poirot's presence had altered everything. What had seemed a tragedy was now a puzzle, and the air about us seemed charged with hidden meaning. "Mark me, Hastings," Poirot said softly. "This crime, it is not of haste, not of passion. It is of calculation. And those who calculate," his eyes narrowed, "they believe themselves superior. But always, there is one little slip, one small imperfection. We shall find it, mon ami. We shall find it." The mist that had cloaked the manor at dawn had burned away by mid-morning, leaving the lawn sparkling under a crisp, untroubled sky. Yet within Rosewood Manor, the air remained heavy. The constables still guarded the pergola, the drawing-room door was still locked. Death, like a guest overstaying its welcome, lingered in every corridor. Inspector Leeming, brisk and businesslike, had arranged a series of interviews in the library. It was a handsome chamber, lined with dark oak shelves, smelling faintly of leather and dust. The windows opened onto the east lawn, though the curtains had been drawn to soften the light. At the center stood a great mahogany table, upon which rested notebooks, pencils, and the inspector's pipe. Poirot entered with his usual composure, his shoes clicking upon the parquet floor. He glanced around, noting the arrangement of chairs, the dust-free surfaces, the precise placement of objects. His mustache twitched with satisfaction at the order. Then, with a small bow to the inspector, he seated himself delicately at the table's corner, folding his hands like a judge preparing for testimony. "Let us proceed, Inspector," he murmured. "We must, as you say in this country, get down to brass tacks." Leeming called the first witness, Miss Beatrice Hale. Beatrice Hale. The niece entered with quick steps, her pale dress rustling faintly. She sat, back rigid, hands clasped tightly. Her eyes, large, dark, and restless, darted toward Poirot, then away. "You were with Lady Ashcombe during the toast," Leeming began. "You handled 2 glasses of champagne." "Why?" Beatrice flushed. "I was showing Geoffrey, that is, Mr. Lytton, how the bubbles cling to the etching. It was nothing. A silly thing." Poirot tilted his head. "Yet you were seen to set down 1 glass hastily when your aunt faltered?" "Yes." "She spoke too quickly." "Because she frightened me. I forgot the glass entirely." "You noticed nothing peculiar in the taste?" Poirot asked gently. "No, nothing. But Aunt Eleanor, she always insisted upon her own glass, with the ribbon. It was her way of avoiding confusion." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Confusion, mademoiselle, is indeed the enemy of order." "Merci." Beatrice rose quickly, as though eager to escape the room. "Geoffrey Lytton." The barrister followed. Tall, thin, and composed, he seated himself with the air of a man accustomed to cross-examination. His voice was cool, precise. "Your relation to Lady Ashcombe?" asked Leeming. "A distant cousin, though more importantly, her legal adviser in certain matters." He adjusted his cuffs. "She was considering revisions to her will." A murmur rippled between Poirot and the inspector. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "That is always interesting." Lytton inclined his head. "Interesting, yes, but hardly sinister. Lady Ashcombe was wealthy. Many stood to benefit or lose by her choices." His eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, toward Beatrice's empty chair. "You observed her closely during the toast?" Poirot asked. "Yes." "She drank without hesitation. If poison was present, it was already in the glass." "You are sure?" "Quite sure." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "And you, monsieur, did you drink from the same bottle?" "I did." "I assure you, I am very much alive." Poirot smiled faintly. "Oui. Alive, and logical. Logic is good. But sometimes," he tapped his temple, "it deceives." "Merci, monsieur." Dr. Edmund Rathbone. The physician's presence filled the room like a storm cloud. He stood until the inspector bade him sit, his manner brusque, almost impatient. "You reached Lady Ashcombe immediately," Leeming said. "What was your opinion?" "Poison," Rathbone answered shortly. "I saw the signs. Burning in the throat, sudden collapse, cold extremities. Classic." Poirot raised a finger delicately. "Classic, doctor, perhaps. But which poison?" Rathbone's eyes narrowed. "I will not speculate until analysis is complete. But certain alkaloids can mimic heart failure. Digitalis, aconite. Or perhaps something more subtle, eh?" Poirot interjected softly. "Something from the garden." The doctor's gaze flickered, only for an instant, toward the roses visible through the curtain's gap. "Plants are dangerous in ignorant hands." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, but in skilled hands, perhaps fatal." Mrs. Iris Vale. When Mrs. Vale entered, the atmosphere altered. She was striking, her dark eyes amused, her smile faintly mocking. She took her seat with a languid grace, as though the entire proceeding were a play staged for her entertainment. "You were nearest Lady Ashcombe when she collapsed," Leeming began. "Yes." "I had just complimented her on her toast." "A dreadful irony, don't you think?" "You saw nothing unusual?" "Only that her face twisted, quite horribly, poor dear. Then the pearls broke. That sound I shall never forget." She shuddered delicately. Poirot leaned forward. "Madam, you have known Lady Ashcombe long?" "10 years. We were friends, in our way. Though Eleanor's friendships were like her roses, pruned sharply if they displeased her." "You suggest she had enemies?" Mrs. Vale's smile deepened. "Does not everyone, Monsieur Poirot? Even you?" Poirot chuckled softly. "Touché, madam." "Clara Sims." At last came Clara, the young companion. She entered nervously, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "You fetched a cushion when Lady Ashcombe collapsed?" Leeming prompted. "Yes. I was told to. I could not think. She frightened me, sometimes, Lady Ashcombe. She was so stern. But I never wished. Oh, I never wished her harm." Tears brimmed in her eyes. Poirot rose, bowed, and placed a chair for her. "Mademoiselle, calm yourself. We ask only for truth, not for confessions. Did you see her glass before she drank?" "I only saw the ribbon," Clara whispered. "She was particular. She never let anyone else drink from it. She said her enemies would not dare while she kept order." Poirot's eyes flashed. "Ah, she spoke of enemies." "Yes. But she laughed when she said it. I thought it was only her way." When the questioning ended, the household dispersed like pieces of a scattered puzzle. Leeming lit his pipe, his brow furrowed. "They all had reason enough, Monsieur Poirot," he muttered. "Money, resentment, old quarrels. But no proof." Poirot smoothed his mustache, his expression thoughtful. "Proof, my friend, it is like the bloom of a rose. It begins as a bud, closed, secret. But with time, with patience, it opens, revealing all. We must wait, observe, arrange." He glanced toward the east lawn, where the pergola stood roped and silent, the crimson bloom still incongruous among the pale. "And always, Inspector," Poirot murmured, "we return to the glass. The ribbon, the pour, the order of service, these things are the skeleton of the truth. When I have placed them in order, then, mon ami, you shall see the face of the murderer." The days at Rosewood seemed to stretch, each hour thickened by unease. Constables still patrolled the lawns, the pergola remained cordoned, and the great drawing-room had grown oppressive with its burden of silence. Inspector Leeming worked steadily, yet each answer produced another knot. Lady Eleanor's death was a puzzle with too many shapes, and none quite fit. Poirot, however, appeared untroubled. Each morning he took his measured stroll through the gardens, hands clasped neatly behind his back, shoes gleaming despite the damp earth. He paused before the pergola as if it were a stage where a play had once been enacted, and then returned to the house with some subtle gleam in his eye. It was on the third morning that he beckoned me aside. "Hastings," he said, lowering his voice, "you are an honest fellow, but not observant, mon cher. Still, you are useful, for what you see with innocence may, to me, reveal significance. Come." We went together into the library, where Inspector Leeming was bent over a sheaf of statements. Poirot drew from his pocket a folded handkerchief. Inside, carefully wrapped, lay a small object, a ribbon, lilac in color, faintly frayed at one edge. "The ribbon!" I exclaimed. "From Lady Eleanor's glass?" "Precisement." Poirot's mustaches twitched with satisfaction. "It was removed too hastily by one of the constables when they cleared the tray. A mere scrap to them, but to me, it is eloquent." Leeming looked up sharply. "And what does it say to you, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot laid the ribbon on the table. He smoothed it flat with delicate fingers. "Regardez." The knot slipped to one side. A careless knot. None. Lady Eleanor's maid, Molly, tied it always with precision. I questioned her. "She ties square, in the center of the stem, every time. But this, ask yourself, why is it crooked?" "Because she tied it carelessly," I suggested. "Mais non. She is a creature of habit. Habits are the chains that bind us, Hastings. When habit is broken, it is not carelessness but intention." Someone untied and retied the ribbon. Leeming frowned. "To what purpose?" Poirot leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "To exchange the glass." The words fell like a stone in water. I caught my breath. But But Lady Eleanor insisted on her own glass. Everyone knew. Just so, Poirot interrupted. She insisted. And so the murderer created the illusion of the same glass by replacing the ribbon. Voila. She believed herself safe, but in truth she drank from a glass chosen by another. Leeming rubbed his chin thoughtfully. That would mean opportunity. Someone close enough, in the bustle before the toast, to interfere with the tray. Exactment. Poirot tapped the ribbon. We must ask, who handled the glasses? Who approached the tray? Who had the chance to untie, retie, and place? I thought back. William the footman held the tray. Molly poured. Beatrice touched 2 glasses. Lytton stood close. Mrs. Vale leaned forward. Rathbone lingered behind. Clara hovered. Poirot's eyes shone. You see, it is not only the obvious suspect, the gardener, the maid, non. The theater of the toast was crowded. The criminal had but a moment, yet he, or she, seized it. That afternoon, Poirot requested the tray, the remaining flutes, and the unopened second bottle be brought into the library. He arranged them with meticulous care, as though restoring a crime scene in miniature. Leeming, Beatrice, Lytton, and the others stood about, curious and uneasy. Mess Amos, Poirot said, observe. The tray holds 12 places. The ribboned glass was here, on the rim, to the right of William's hand. See how simple it is for a person to lift one, set it down, retie the ribbon, and return it, while conversation and laughter distract. Seconds only. Beatrice shuddered. You mean someone deliberately tricked her? Oui. Someone clever. Someone who knew Lady Eleanor's habits, her fear of confusion. By imitating the ribbon, they lulled her into security. Mrs. Vale arched a brow. It is a clever theory, Monsieur Poirot. But theories prove nothing. Poirot smiled faintly. Madam, everything proves something. It is only a question of arrangement. Later, when the household had dispersed, Poirot confided in me. Hastings, this ribbon, it is the crack in the armor. The murderer wished us to believe Lady Eleanor died from chance, from the ordinary pour of champagne. But non, it was design. The ribbon is crooked, the knot betrays the hand. It tells us there was interference, and that interference narrows our circle of suspicion. Then you know who did it? I asked eagerly. Not yet, but soon. Always there is the one detail which does not fit, the one petal out of place among the roses. Here it is, the ribbon. It points, it whispers. And when I have listened fully, Hastings, I shall know. He folded the ribbon once more, tucked it into his pocket, and straightened his cuffs with fastidious care. Until then we wait. We watch. And we let the guilty believe themselves still unseen. The storm of whispers thickened at Rosewood Manor. The servants went about their duties in silence, while the family and guests moved with the tension of actors in a play whose lines they did not fully know. Poirot seemed unaffected by the heaviness that lay over the house. He went calmly about his observations, as precise in his manner as ever, until the hour came when Inspector Leeming had gathered them once again in the library. There, beneath the watchful rows of books, the layers of deceit began to peel back. James Wilcox stood first before them. His figure was rough-hewn, his hands coarse, and yet the emotion behind his words was raw. I told you before, he muttered, his eyes darting toward the window and the roses beyond. I wouldn't touch her glass. My eyes were for the pergola, not the tray. Poirot's gaze sharpened and asked quietly if he had noticed the red bloom slipped among the pale. Wilcox's mouth tightened. I noticed. It didn't belong. Her ladyship hated clashes, would never have allowed it. Someone else put it there. I had quarrels with her, yes, over what she did to my daughter, but I wouldn't have murdered her. Not me. Poirot inclined his head gravely, murmuring that the roses spoke loudly indeed, perhaps more than the man realized. Mrs. Vale followed, her black gown sweeping softly as she entered. She sat with elegance, her eyes alight with something between amusement and defiance. Surely you cannot think me capable of tying ribbons and tampering with champagne, she said with a languid laugh. Poirot asked if her friendship with Lady Ashcombe had not been fraught with tension. She allowed the faintest smile. Friendship with Eleanor was always tension. We sparred. We reconciled. And yes, there was money. She lent me a sum, pressed for repayment. I could not give it. But to poison her? That is vulgar, Monsieur Poirot. Not my style. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Yet money, madam, is the most vulgar of motives. And it kills as surely as any poison. Geoffrey Lytton arrived with the composure of a man used to the witness box. He smoothed his cuffs before he spoke. Yes, Lady Ashcombe intended to alter her will. I prepared the drafts. His voice was cool, measured. Poirot asked softly what the old will provided. Lytton hesitated, then admitted, it favored Miss Hale, of course. The new will would have diverted much to charitable trusts. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And if she died before signing? Lytton's face was unreadable, but a flicker betrayed him. Then the old will held. But I am her solicitor. I carried out her instructions, no more. Poirot said nothing, only smoothing his mustache as if in thought. Dr. Rathbone entered like a storm, tall and severe. His words were clipped, impatient. She was poisoned. That is fact. Certain alkaloids, aconite, perhaps, mimic the heart's collapse. I will not speculate further. Poirot raised a finger. You quarreled with her, did you not? She mistrusted your prescriptions. The doctor's face darkened. She was obstinate, yes. But I do not poison patients. Poirot murmured, knowledge is temptation, doctor. It gives power, and power has been misused before. The companion came last. Clara Sims clutched a small book to her chest, her eyes downcast. I never wished her harm, she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. Poirot's tone softened. Mademoiselle, you carry a book. What is it? She hesitated, then opened it. A diary, filled with neat entries. Lady Ashcombe made me keep it, she said. She said memory fails, but ink does not. I wrote down conversations, what was said in her presence. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he scanned a page. Très bien. Ink is faithful when lips are not. This may tell us what memory conceals. When the interviews were done, the room fell into silence. Poirot walked to the window, his small figure neat and precise against the pale curtain. Outside, the roses shone in the sun, the crimson bloom still glaring among the pale. He spoke softly, almost to himself. They lie, each of them. From fear, from pride, from greed. But truth, it peeps out like the thorn beneath the petal. The crooked ribbon told us the method. The diary may whisper of motive. Soon, Hastings, we shall see the full bloom of the truth. For in every garden weeds grow beside roses, and in every family secrets beside love. The air at Rosewood was taut as a violin string. 2 days had passed since Lady Eleanor's death, and beneath the silence of the house one felt the weight of unspoken things pressing against its walls. The constables, moving with boots too heavy for the parquet floors, seemed only to sharpen the tension. Even Inspector Leaming, steady by nature, had grown curt. Poirot alone remained composed, his eyes gleaming with the quiet assurance of a man who waited for a fruit to ripen and fall into his hand. It was during luncheon, a strained affair taken in the morning room, that the first crack appeared. The table gleamed with silver, though little food was touched. Beatrice Hale sat pale and restless, her fork pushed through a cutlet without appetite. Across from her, Mrs. Vale sipped wine with the deliberation of a woman enjoying a private jest. Dr. Rathbone spoke little, but his eyes roved sharply from face to face. Clara Sims, at the lower end, kept her eyes on her plate, trembling when addressed. Geoffrey Lytton carved his portion with legal precision, though his lips tightened whenever Beatrice stirred. Poirot, who ate delicately and with evident enjoyment, allowed the silence to stretch. Then, setting down his knife with a soft click, he spoke lightly. It is curious, is it not, that Lady Ashcombe, so precise, so orderly, should have allowed confusion at her last fate? The ribbon on the glass was tied crookedly. Very odd. His eyes moved round the table. Aunt Eleanor was meticulous. She did not permit oddities. Unless someone permitted it for her. The effect was immediate. Beatrice's hand jerked. The fork clattered against her plate. The room fell utterly still. Her cheeks flamed. Must we speak of ribbons at table? She demanded. Aunt Eleanor is dead. Must we pick over trifles? Mais oui, mademoiselle, Poirot replied gently. It is by trifles that great truths are revealed. A ribbon crooked, a glass displaced, a rose where it should not be, all these are voices, if one has ears to listen. Mrs. Vale's eyes glittered with mischief. Perhaps the ribbon slipped because someone's hand shook. Beatrice, darling, your hands tremble often enough. Beatrice rose abruptly, her chair scraping. How dare you? You imply. She stopped, breathless, and for a moment her mask of composure fell. In her eyes burned fear, anger, and something perilously close to guilt. Poirot's voice, low and calm, reached across the table like a hand laid on a fevered brow. Sit, mademoiselle. Sit and breathe. No one accuses. Yet your agitation, it betrays that you know more than you have said. Her lips parted. She looked from face to face. Geoffrey half rose as though to shield her, but she pushed him back with a trembling hand. You would all think the worst of me, she cried. Yes, I touched 2 glasses. Yes, I spoke to Molly about the ribbon. But it was Aunt who insisted. She said she would never trust another unless the ribbon marked her own. I only asked the girl if she had remembered. Is that crime? He folded the ribbon once more, tucked it into his pocket, and straightened his cuffs with fastidious care. Until then we wait. We watch. And we let the guilty believe themselves still unseen. The storm of whispers thickened at Rosewood Manor. The servants went about their duties in silence, while the family and guests moved with the tension of actors in a play whose lines they did not fully know. Poirot seemed unaffected by the heaviness that lay over the house. He went calmly about his observations, as precise in his manner as ever, until the hour came when Inspector Leeming had gathered them once again in the library. There, beneath the watchful rows of books, the layers of deceit began to peel back. James Wilcox stood first before them. His figure was rough-hewn, his hands coarse, and yet the emotion behind his words was raw. I told you before, he muttered, his eyes darting toward the window and the roses beyond. I wouldn't touch her glass. My eyes were for the pergola, not the tray. Poirot's gaze sharpened and asked quietly if he had noticed the red bloom slipped among the pale. Wilcox's mouth tightened. I noticed. It didn't belong. Her ladyship hated clashes, would never have allowed it. Someone else put it there. I had quarrels with her, yes, over what she did to my daughter, but I wouldn't have murdered her. Not me. Poirot inclined his head gravely, murmuring that the roses spoke loudly indeed, perhaps more than the man realized. Mrs. Vale followed, her black gown sweeping softly as she entered. She sat with elegance, her eyes alight with something between amusement and defiance. Surely you cannot think me capable of tying ribbons and tampering with champagne, she said with a languid laugh. Poirot asked if her friendship with Lady Ashcombe had not been fraught with tension. She allowed the faintest smile. Friendship with Eleanor was always tension. We sparred. We reconciled. And yes, there was money. She lent me a sum, pressed for repayment. I could not give it. But to poison her? That is vulgar, Monsieur Poirot. Not my style. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Yet money, madam, is the most vulgar of motives. And it kills as surely as any poison. Geoffrey Lytton arrived with the composure of a man used to the witness box. He smoothed his cuffs before he spoke. Yes, Lady Ashcombe intended to alter her will. I prepared the drafts. His voice was cool, measured. Poirot asked softly what the old will provided. Lytton hesitated, then admitted, it favored Miss Hale, of course. The new will would have diverted much to charitable trusts. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And if she died before signing? Lytton's face was unreadable, but a flicker betrayed him. Then the old will held. But I am her solicitor. I carried out her instructions, no more. Poirot said nothing, only smoothing his mustache as if in thought. Dr. Rathbone entered like a storm, tall and severe. His words were clipped, impatient. She was poisoned. That is fact. Certain alkaloids, aconite, perhaps, mimic the heart's collapse. I will not speculate further. Poirot raised a finger. You quarreled with her, did you not? She mistrusted your prescriptions. The doctor's face darkened. She was obstinate, yes. But I do not poison patients. Poirot murmured, "Knowledge is temptation, doctor. It gives power, and power has been misused before." The companion came last. Clara Sims clutched a small book to her chest, her eyes downcast. "I never wished her harm," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. Poirot's tone softened. "Mademoiselle, you carry a book. What is it?" She hesitated, then opened it. A diary, filled with neat entries. "Lady Ashcombe made me keep it," she said. "She said memory fails, but ink does not. I wrote down conversations, what was said in her presence." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he scanned a page. "Très bien. Ink is faithful when lips are not. This may tell us what memory conceals." When the interviews were done, the room fell into silence. Poirot walked to the window, his small figure neat and precise against the pale curtain. Outside, the roses shone in the sun, the crimson bloom still glaring among the pale. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "They lie, each of them. From fear, from pride, from greed. But truth, it peeps out like the thorn beneath the petal. The crooked ribbon told us the method. The diary may whisper of motive. Soon, Hastings, we shall see the full bloom of the truth. For in every garden weeds grow beside roses, and in every family secrets beside love." The air at Rosewood was taut as a violin string. 2 days had passed since Lady Eleanor's death, and beneath the silence of the house one felt the weight of unspoken things pressing against its walls. The constables, moving with boots too heavy for the parquet floors, seemed only to sharpen the tension. Even Inspector Leeming, steady by nature, had grown curt. Poirot alone remained composed, his eyes gleaming with the quiet assurance of a man who waited for a fruit to ripen and fall into his hand. It was during luncheon, a strained affair taken in the morning room, that the first crack appeared. The table gleamed with silver, though little food was touched. Beatrice Hale sat pale and restless, her fork pushed through a cutlet without appetite. Across from her, Mrs. Vale sipped wine with the deliberation of a woman enjoying a private jest. Dr. Rathbone spoke little, but his eyes roved sharply from face to face. Clara Sims, at the lower end, kept her eyes on her plate, trembling when addressed. Geoffrey Lytton carved his portion with legal precision, though his lips tightened whenever Beatrice stirred. Poirot, who ate delicately and with evident enjoyment, allowed the silence to stretch. Then, setting down his knife with a soft click, he spoke lightly. "It is curious, is it not, that Lady Ashcombe, so precise, so orderly, should have allowed confusion at her last fate? The ribbon on the glass was tied crookedly. Very odd." His eyes moved round the table. Aunt Eleanor was meticulous. She did not permit oddities. Unless someone permitted it for her. The effect was immediate. Beatrice's hand jerked. The fork clattered against her plate. The room fell utterly still. Her cheeks flamed. "Must we speak of ribbons at table?" she demanded. "Aunt Eleanor is dead. Must we pick over trifles?" "Mais oui, mademoiselle," Poirot replied gently. "It is by trifles that great truths are revealed. A ribbon crooked, a glass displaced, a rose where it should not be, all these are voices, if one has ears to listen." Mrs. Vale's eyes glittered with mischief. Perhaps the ribbon slipped because someone's hand shook. "Beatrice, darling, your hands tremble often enough." Beatrice rose abruptly, her chair scraping. "How dare you? You imply—" She stopped, breathless, and for a moment her mask of composure fell. In her eyes burned fear, anger, and something perilously close to guilt. Poirot's voice, low and calm, reached across the table like a hand laid on a fevered brow. "Sit, mademoiselle. Sit and breathe. No one accuses. Yet your agitation, it betrays that you know more than you have said." Her lips parted. She looked from face to face. Geoffrey half rose as though to shield her, but she pushed him back with a trembling hand. "You would all think the worst of me," she cried. "Yes, I touched 2 glasses. Yes, I spoke to Molly about the ribbon. But it was Aunt who insisted. She said she would never trust another unless the ribbon marked her own. I only asked the girl if she had remembered. Is that crime?" The silence deepened. Dr. Rathbone's hawk-like gaze softened fractionally. Clara let out a little sob. Inspector Leeming made a note, his pipe forgotten in his hand. Beatrice sank back into her chair, her defiance collapsing into despair. "She ruled us all," she whispered. "Even in death, she rules us still." Poirot regarded her with grave compassion. "Mademoiselle, you have told us something important." Lady Ashcombe feared confusion, feared betrayal. It was her obsession. And obsessions, when known, are the murderer's opportunity. "That is all." His tone was final, but his eyes lingered on her with a look that was neither judgment nor absolution, only calculation. Afterwards, as we walked together on the terrace, I could not contain my question. "Poirot, you saw it. She knows more. She is hiding something." He tapped his cane delicately against the stone. "Eh bien, Hastings, perhaps she hides something, but not necessarily the crime. There are lies that are shields, not swords. Did you not see? Her fear was not of discovery, but of shame. There is some secret, but whether it is murder, that we must see." "But surely her reaction—" "Mon ami," he interrupted, "emotion is like perfume. It lingers about many things and confuses the senses. A guilty conscience, perhaps. Or perhaps only the bitterness of dependency, of a life bound to an ant's purse strings. Do not leap. You are English. You leap like the fox. I, Hercule Poirot, walk step by step, until the truth is inevitable." He paused, looking out over the roses, where the crimson blooms still flared among the pale. "Mark this, Hastings. The murderer grows uneasy. Already the mask slips. Soon, under the weight of their own falsehoods, someone will break. The little gray cells are patient, but guilt, it is not." And with that, he turned neatly on his heel, leaving me staring out at the flowers, wondering whose secret had just stirred beneath the summer sun. The day dawned bright and cloudless, as though the world outside had forgotten that death lingered within the walls of Rosewood Manor. Yet the household knew it well. Breakfast was a tense affair, conversation clipped, every gesture watched. Poirot ate his eggs with neat precision, as though nothing disturbed him, but I saw the gleam in his eye. He was preparing something. By mid-morning, he had spoken quietly with Inspector Leeming, and the two of them arranged the gathering. Word was carried through the corridors. The household must assemble in the drawing-room at 11 o'clock. The effect was immediate. I saw Beatrice blanch as she heard it, Geoffrey's mouth set in a hard line, Mrs. Vale lift her brows with amused curiosity. Clara trembled, whispering a prayer under her breath, and even Dr. Rathbone paused in the act of lighting a cigarette, his expression sour. At the appointed hour, we gathered. The great drawing-room, sealed since Lady Eleanor's collapse, was opened again. The curtains had been drawn wide, and sunlight spilled over the furniture, cruel in its brightness. The chair where she had sat remained empty, a silent witness to the crime. Poirot stood at the center, his small frame commanding all attention. His mustaches were immaculate, his hands clasped lightly behind his back. He looked less like a guest, more like a judge about to pronounce sentence. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, his voice quiet but carrying. "It is time. Time that we bring a little order into this chaos. One among you has committed a crime, cold, deliberate, and cruel. And though you all protest innocence, the truth will not remain hidden. It peeps out, here and there, like a thorn beneath the petal. It pricks, and I see where the blood lies." A silence fell. Mrs. Vale crossed her legs, her eyes glittering. Geoffrey Lytton leaned forward, his fingers tapping his knee. Clara clasped her hands so tightly the knuckles whitened. Beatrice sat rigid, staring straight ahead. Dr. Rathbone folded his arms, his face like stone. Wilcox stood near the window, his cap in hand, gaze fixed stubbornly on the floor. Poirot paced slowly before them. "We speak first of the ribbon." Always Lady Ashcombe had her glass marked, to protect against confusion. But this time, the ribbon was tied crookedly. Why? Because it had been untied, retied, by another hand. That ribbon tells us the glass was exchanged. Someone contrived that Lady Ashcombe should drink not from her own, but from one chosen for her. He paused. Beatrice gave a small, strangled gasp. Poirot's eyes flicked to her, but he did not pause. Then we speak of the rose. The pergola was adorned with pale blossoms. Yet someone slipped into it one crimson bloom, out of place, out of order. Was it bravado? A signature? Or perhaps, a signal? But there it stands, mute testimony that the crime was not chance, but theater. The murderer is clever, and wished us to know it. Dr. Rathbone made a sound of impatience. Poirot turned to him swiftly. Doctor, you above all know the poisons of plants. Aconite, digitalis, hellebore, these are names that would come easily to your lips. Yet Lady Ashcombe's symptoms, they were of burning, of sudden collapse, of coldness. It may be such a poison, yes. But it may be something more subtle, an extract from a flower in this very garden. A poison that leaves little trace. Rathbone's face darkened, but he said nothing. Poirot's eyes moved on. Madame Vale, your debts to Lady Ashcombe were considerable. You admitted as much. Money, money is the basest of motives. But it kills as surely as a knife. Monsieur Lytton, you, the man of law, you knew the old will stood until the new one was signed. If Lady Ashcombe died, your cousin inherited richly. Perhaps you too, as trustee, would gain. And you, Mademoiselle Beatrice, your fortune depended on your aunt's whims. Quarrels between you were known. 1 week before, she spoke sharply of disinheriting you. Is it not so? Beatrice's hands flew to her face. Stop. Must you torment me? She threatened, yes. But I loved her in my way. I am no poisoner. Then perhaps, Poirot said softly, you know who is? Her lips parted, but no words came. She bowed her head, trembling. Poirot turned his gaze upon Clara. And you, mademoiselle, you kept the diary. Lady Ashcombe insisted you record her words. Those pages, they are valuable indeed. They may tell us whom she feared, whom she mistrusted. Already you revealed she spoke of enemies. I think, perhaps, she named one. Clara gave a small cry, clutching the diary to her chest. No. She said things, yes, but she did not mean them. She laughed. She always laughed. Poirot's eyes softened. Or perhaps, she laughed because truth spoken in jest is the most dangerous truth of all. He let the words hang. The room seemed to pulse with silence. Even the ticking of the clock sounded louder. Then Poirot drew himself up. The murderer sits among us. Already I see the cracks in your armor. Already one of you trembles, one of you sweats, one of you waits too calmly. Soon, I shall put each fact in its place. Then, Miss Amos, you shall see the picture complete. He bowed slightly to Inspector Leeming. The trap is set. We shall see who stumbles. And with that, Poirot turned, his neat shoes clicking across the floor, leaving behind a silence more terrible than accusation. For each face in that room now carried the shadow of suspicion, and none could tell when the noose would tighten. The drawing-room at Rosewood Manor was full, every chair pressed into service, every face taut with expectation. Outside, the roses glowed in the summer sun, innocent in their splendor, while within, the air was weighted with suspense. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, immaculate, his hands clasped lightly, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a craftsman about to reveal his finished work. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice measured, calm, yet carrying to every corner. At last, the time has come. I promised you order, and now I give it. For the death of Lady Eleanor Ashcombe was no accident of nature. It was murder, deliberate, planned, and clever. But cleverness, eh bien, it is a two-edged sword. The criminal left behind the smallest of imperfections. And it is from these little things, the crooked ribbon, the crimson rose, that I have rebuilt the truth. A murmur rippled through the room. Beatrice clasped her hands tightly. Geoffrey Lytton's jaw stiffened. Mrs. Vale tilted her head, eyes gleaming with sardonic amusement. Clara looked down at her lap, the diary clutched close. Dr. Rathbone's face was carved in stone, while Wilcox shifted uneasily near the door. Inspector Leeming stood at the back, pipe forgotten, eyes intent on Poirot. First, Poirot continued, the method. Lady Ashcombe insisted always upon her own glass, marked with a ribbon. She believed this protected her. But, as I discovered, the ribbon was tied crookedly, unlike the precise hand of her maid. That ribbon had been untied and tied again. Why? To exchange the glass. Lady Ashcombe believed herself secure, yet she drank from the vessel chosen for her by the murderer. He paused, letting the words sink in. Second, the rose. Among the pale blossoms of the pergola was placed one crimson bloom. An intruder, a signal, perhaps a signature. A boast of the criminal's artistry. Yet to me it shouted, this was not chance. This was design. For only a mind both arrogant and theatrical would leave such a clue. He turned his gaze slowly across the room. Now, motive. Lady Ashcombe was not without enemies. Mrs. Vale owed her money, debts never to be repaid. Colonel Arbuthnot had quarreled with her over investments. Dr. Rathbone was angered by her mistrust of his prescriptions. Monsieur Lytton drafted a will that, if unsigned, left Beatrice wealthy, but if completed, diminished her inheritance greatly. And Beatrice herself lived under her aunt's stern rule, threatened with disinheritance, embittered by dependence. Beatrice flinched as every eye turned to her. Yes, she threatened, but I would not. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mademoiselle. You are innocent of the act, though guilty perhaps of silence. For you saw something, you know something, and fear has kept your lips closed. He turned sharply to Lytton. Monsieur, you too had much to gain. The old will remained in force. As trustee, you stood to control considerable fortune. But you are logical, precise, not a man to risk so daring and theatrical a crime. Poirot's eyes moved at last to Mrs. Vale. Madam, you jest, you mock, but debts are heavy chains. Yet your temperament is indolent, not industrious. You would seek escape in charm, not poison. He let the silence build, then said softly, No, the hand that did this belonged to one who had both knowledge and arrogance. Knowledge of poisons, yes, but also of Lady Ashcombe's habits. One who stood close at the toast, yet seemed beyond suspicion. One who knew how to exploit her obsession with order. Poirot stepped forward, his finger pointing like a sword. It was you, Dr. Rathbone. The room gasped. The physician's face did not move, but his eyes flickered, and that flicker was enough. Yes, doctor, Poirot continued. You, who alone had the skill to choose a poison subtle, swift, leaving symptoms that mimicked natural illness. You, who quarreled with Lady Ashcombe, whose authority she defied. You resented her contempt for your science. And so, you resolved to punish. At the toast, while all eyes were on the lady, you shifted a glass, retied the ribbon in haste. She drank, and within minutes the poison worked. Poirot's voice sharpened. And the crimson rose. A flourish of vanity. You could not resist leaving your mark, as if to say, Here is the artistry of a man who knows life and death. Dr. Rathbone's lips parted. For a moment, silence hung. Then, with a harsh laugh, he said, You have imagination, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Imagination. None. Observation. For when you bent over her body, you did not examine her as a physician should. You sniffed the rim of the glass Beatrice had set down. You knew already what it contained. And later, you wiped your fingers too carefully, too thoroughly. You feared the trace of the extract upon them. The color drained from Rathbone's face. Mrs. Vale leaned back with a hiss of satisfaction. Beatrice gave a strangled sob. Leeming stepped forward, his voice firm. Dr. Edmund Rathbone, I must ask you to accompany me. There will be further questions at the station. For a heartbeat, I thought the doctor would resist. His hands clenched, his frame taut. Then, with a weary sag, he straightened, his eyes bleak. She humiliated me, he muttered. Year after year, she mocked my judgment, undermined me before the village. She thought herself untouchable. Well, I touched her. And it was perfect. Poirot shook his head, gently, almost sadly. Perfect? Non, monsieur. There is no perfect crime. Always there is a flaw. The crooked ribbon, the rose out of place. Vanity betrays you. It always does. The constables led him out. The room exhaled as if freed from a spell. Yet the silence remained heavy, as though the roses themselves pressed their faces to the windows, witnesses to pride, folly, and death. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, glanced at the chair where Lady Eleanor had once ruled her court, and said quietly, "Justice has come to Rosewood Manor. Order is restored. But, mon Dieu, at what a price!" The manor was quiet at last. The constables had gone, the doctor in their custody, and Inspector Leaming with them. The drawing room, so heavy these past days with dread, now lay still in the late afternoon sun. Dust motes drifted like faint gold over the polished tables, the great chair sat empty, and the roses outside glowed faintly as the light softened toward evening. Poirot and I remained. We had taken coffee together in the library, the air rich with the scent of leather bindings and beeswax polish. Poirot sipped delicately, as neat in his posture as ever, and I could not resist breaking the silence. "So it was Rathbone all along," I said, almost incredulous. I thought at first that Beatrice must be hiding something dreadful, or that Lytton's legal cleverness pointed to him. Yet it was the doctor. And to think, Hastings, he would have gone unsuspected had you not noticed the ribbon. Poirot inclined his head, mustaches twitching. "Ah, mon ami, but you must not forget, it is not only the ribbon. It is the psychology. Always, with crime, it is the psychology. The ribbon was the fact, the crooked knot was the clue. But the arrogance, that was the truth." He set down his cup with a soft click. Rathbone was a man who could not endure ridicule. Lady Ashcombe belittled him before others, dismissed his prescriptions, mocked his authority. To such a man, pride is a fragile vessel. Break it, and what remains is resentment, resentment sharpened into revenge. He wished to demonstrate that he, not she, commanded life and death. And so, he chose poison, a plant extract, subtle, cruel, theatrical. But pride, Hastings, pride always betrays. He left his flourish, the crimson rose, because he could not resist. I sat back, thoughtful. And Beatrice's distress? Poirot spread his hands. That was of another nature. Dependence is a cruel mistress. To live under the shadow of a stern aunt, to be threatened with disinheritance, to quarrel and yet still need, such a life leaves wounds of its own. But she is young. Perhaps she will recover. As for Lytton, the solicitor, he was too rational for such drama. He saw the gain, yes, but he would not have risked the rope. And Madame Vale? She had debts, but indolence is her nature. To commit so elaborate a crime requires energy, precision, calculation. She preferred to drift on charm and circumstance. He rose, pacing to the window. The roses stirred in a faint breeze, their petals trembling like secrets too long held. It is curious, Hastings, how alike they are to human hearts. Beautiful, proud, but each with a thorn. Lady Ashcombe tended them with discipline, pruning, ordering, controlling. And yet, it was a flower that marked her death. There is a kind of irony in that. We stood together, gazing out at the garden. The pergola, once roped with police lines, now stood open, the single crimson rose already wilting among the pale. Poirot's voice was soft, almost tender. "In the end, my friend, order triumphs. The truth arranges itself, the chaos resolves, and justice, however harsh, restores the balance. That is my task, always, to find the symmetry, the pattern beneath the disorder. Without order, life is unbearable. With it, even sorrow may be endured." He turned to me, his eyes bright with that curious blend of pride and melancholy that was uniquely his. "Lady Ashcombe is dead, yes. But her household, her fortune, even her roses, they will live on. The murderer is unmasked, the scales set right. And Hercule Poirot," he tapped his temple lightly, "has once more proved the power of the little gray cells." We left Rosewood Manor the following morning. As the motor carried us down the long drive, I glanced back at the house standing serene in the sunlight. It looked as though nothing had changed, as though no crime had stained its lawns. Yet for those within, and for us who had borne witness, it would never be quite the same. Poirot sat beside me, neat as ever, adjusting a crease in his cuff. "Another garden tended, Hastings," he murmured. "Another weed plucked out." He closed his eyes with satisfaction. "It is enough." The train from Ashcombe Halt rattled eastward, bearing Poirot and me back toward London. Yet though the case had been neatly concluded, Though Dr. Rathbone was in custody and Inspector Leeming satisfied, Poirot's expression remained contemplative. His small figure sat upright, his hands folded, his eyes gazing out over the rolling countryside as if the hedgerows concealed yet another puzzle. "Strange," I ventured, "that you look so pensive, Poirot. You have solved the case, restored order. What more remains?" Poirot stirred. "Ah, mon ami, it is not enough to solve. One must also consider the echoes. A crime is like a stone cast into a pond. The ripples spread outward, touching shores far from where it fell. I think now of those who remain at Rosewood, of how their lives are altered." He leaned forward, lowering his voice though we were alone in the carriage. "Take Mademoiselle Beatrice. She inherits, under the old will, unaltered by Lady Ashcombe's intentions, she gains greatly. Yet she will never escape the shadow of suspicion. She trembled too much, concealed too much. Even acquitted by my words, she will not be acquitted by the whispers of others." I protested. "Surely, after Rathbone's confession—" Poirot raised a delicate finger. "Confession, Hastings, is a curious thing. To some it is proof absolute, to others, only one thread in a tapestry of deceit. Ah, society, it is pitiless. The fortune Beatrice gains may be as much a burden as a blessing. She will spend it surrounded by eyes that ask, silently, did she know more than she told?" He sighed, smoothing his mustache. "And then, Monsieur Lytton. His ambition was cooled, I think. He believed his logic protected him, that reason was a fortress. Yet he did not reckon on vanity, the doctor's vanity, which undid him. He is left to administer the estate, but his reputation will carry the taint of proximity to scandal. He must labor doubly hard to restore his name." I nodded thoughtfully. "And Mrs. Vale?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Madame Vale, quelle femme! She delights in danger, in scandal. She will turn this affair into her story, embroidered at dinner parties, whispered at soirees. Debts may still trouble her, but she has gained a new coin, notoriety. It will serve her, as it always does." "And Clara?" I asked softly. His eyes grew grave. "Ah, the companion. Always the companions, Hastings. They are shadows of their mistresses, living lives not their own. Clara will leave Rosewood, I think. Her diary, that book of secrets. It is too dangerous to remain. Already she has seen how words, once written, may be daggers. She will seek obscurity, perhaps in another house, perhaps in solitude. She is young, but marked by what she has witnessed." For a time we were silent, the rhythm of the train filling the carriage. Poirot sat immaculately, yet his gaze seemed far away. "And Wilcox, the gardener," he said at last. "He will remain among his roses. He is innocent, yet he too suffers. For the crimson bloom was not his work, but it will be remembered as part of the crime. His roses, once symbols of beauty, will be recalled as accomplices to murder. That is the cruelty of crime, Hastings. It stains not only the guilty, but all it touches." I felt a chill, despite the sun streaming through the carriage window. Poirot's words seemed to stretch beyond Rosewood, beyond this one case, into the heart of human life. "You speak as though no one escapes unscathed," I said. Poirot turned his eyes to me, and for once they were not amused but profoundly serious. "Non, mon ami. That is the truth. Crime is never solitary. It wounds the victim, yes, but also the family, the friends, the servants, even the flowers in the garden. Each bears a mark. It is for that reason that order must be restored, that truth must be spoken, even when it is cruel. Without truth, the wounds fester. With truth, they may heal a little." He leaned back then, satisfied, and drew out his silver watch, polishing it with a square of silk. "And so, Hastings, we return to London. Another case concluded, another weed plucked from the garden. Until the next stone falls into the pond, we may enjoy a little peace." I looked out at the fields, the hedgerows flashing by, and thought of Rosewood, with its pale roses and that single crimson bloom. Poirot was right. The ripples of Lady Eleanor's death would spread far and wide, long after the petals had fallen and the pergola grown quiet. Yet I knew, too, that wherever the ripples carried us, Poirot would be ready, calm, meticulous, waiting for the next disturbance in the waters of order. The air at Rosewood Manor was heavy with a silence of a different kind. Gone was the fearful hush of suspicion, the oppressive weight of an unsolved crime. What remained was quieter, yet no less profound, the silence of aftermath. Life had resumed its forms. Servants moved with trays, doors opened and closed, the gardens were tended. But beneath each action ran a current of unease, the knowledge that the house had been scarred. Beatrice Hale returned to the manor first. She had spent the week with friends in Bath, spirited away by Geoffrey Lytton after the arrest, to escape the glare of gossip. But gossip travels faster than trains, and already the county knew the story in fragments, embroidered by imagination. When she stepped once more into the great hall, her pale face framed by her mourning veil, the household stilled as though the ghost of Lady Eleanor herself had entered. The servants curtsied stiffly. Molly the maid avoided her eyes. Even Wilcox, the gardener, bowed his head with awkward reluctance. Beatrice felt it keenly. I saw the way her hands clenched at her sides, her lips pressed tight. Poirot, who had returned at Lady Ashcombe's solicitor's invitation to tie loose ends, watched her with that penetrating gentleness that was often sharper than accusation. In the drawing-room, Geoffrey Lytton received her. He looked strained, his thin face drawn, though he greeted her warmly enough. "Beatrice," he said, "you must be brave. The estate is yours now. But the world, well, the world will not be kind." She gave a brittle laugh. "It has not been kind these 20 years. Why should it begin now?" Poirot, seated in the corner with his hands folded neatly, observed, "Mademoiselle, it is not only unkindness you must fear. It is doubt. Doubt will cling to you like perfume, intangible, invisible, yet always present. You inherit the fortune, yes, but also the shadow. How you bear it, that is your true inheritance." Beatrice's eyes filled with sudden tears. "I never poisoned her," she whispered. "I was foolish, careless perhaps, but not wicked. Will anyone believe that?" Poirot's gaze softened. "It matters less what they believe, mademoiselle, than what you believe. Innocence must be lived, not merely declared." Later, we walked the gardens with Poirot. The pergola was bright with new blossoms, the crimson rose long since wilted and gone. Wilcox moved among them with his shears, slower now, his back stooped as though the weight of the crime had settled upon him. "He suffers still," I murmured, "though he had no hand in it." Poirot nodded. "Such is the cruelty of crime. The innocent are always wounded. For him, every rose cut will recall the bloom that was misused. Yet perhaps, in time, tending them will also heal him. It is his way of speaking to the world, n'est-ce pas?" As we passed the servants' wing, we glimpsed Clara Sims departing, her small suitcase in hand, the diary clasped tightly beneath her arm. She walked quickly, head bent, like a shadow slipping from the house. "Where will she go?" I asked. "Where all companions go when their service ends," Poirot said softly. "To another household, perhaps. Or to solitude. But she will carry her ink with her. That book of words, Hastings, it is both her burden and her shield." In the evening, Mrs. Vale arrived unannounced, clad in a gown too bright for morning. She embraced Beatrice with theatrical sympathy, then sat by the fire with a glass of brandy. "The county is positively thrilling with talk," she declared. "You will never escape it, dear child, so you may as well enjoy it. Better to be whispered about than forgotten." Poirot regarded her with a faint smile. "Madam, you have turned scandal into art. But not everyone is so resilient." She laughed, a rich sound. "Resilient? No. Practical, perhaps. Life is short, Poirot, and people cruel. Best to make use of what they say." Beatrice turned away, her shoulders stiff, and Geoffrey placed a protective hand upon her arm. Poirot's eyes lingered a moment, thoughtful. He saw not only the present tableau but the lines of consequence stretching outward, the gossip, the fortunes, the silent wounds. As we departed the manor that night, Poirot paused once more at the garden gate. The air was sweet with the scent of roses, though for me it would never again be innocent. "Do you see, Hastings?" he said quietly. "The crime is solved, but the play continues. Each character acts their part in the aftermath. The lawyer, the niece, the friend, the servant, each bears a mark. It is so always. Murder is never the end. It is the beginning of ripples. I shivered as the summer night closed around us, and in the stillness of the roses I felt again the shadow of Lady Eleanor, imperious and unbending, ruling her domain even in death. The morning at Rosewood broke clear and fine, as though the estate itself sought to reclaim its dignity. The lawns gleamed with dew, the roses hung heavy on their stems, and the lake mirrored the sky with unbroken calm. Yet within the manor, no serenity reigned. Whispers still coursed through the corridors, servants exchanged glances, and in every room hung the memory of Lady Eleanor's imperious presence. Poirot, having accepted Geoffrey Lytton's invitation to remain a day longer, spent the morning in the library, surrounded by ledgers and papers. He examined them not for clues, for the case was closed, but with the eye of a man who believed that to set a house in order one must begin at its foundations. Beatrice entered once, asked softly if he needed anything, then withdrew again, as though the very sight of her aunt's solicitor and her aunt's detective together unsettled her. By afternoon, Poirot requested that the family and household assemble once more in the drawing-room. They obeyed with unease, for though the murderer was gone, Poirot's summons carried the weight of judgment. He stood by the mantel, immaculate as ever, his hands clasped, his head inclined. "My friends," he began, "you may ask why I gather you again. The murderer is taken, the law shall deal with him. But murder, Immerse, is not so simple. It does not end with the arrest. It leaves behind questions, resentments, wounds. And unless these are seen clearly, they fester." He let his gaze rest upon each in turn. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, you inherit. But you inherit not only the fortune, also the suspicion. For you quarreled with your aunt, and you trembled under questioning. The world will whisper. Take care how you live. Innocence must shine, not merely be proclaimed. Let your conduct be the ribbon tied straight, not crooked, upon your glass." Beatrice bowed her head, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Geoffrey placed a steadying hand upon her shoulder. "Vous, Monsieur Lytton," Poirot continued, "you are a man of reason, of law. But remember, reason alone is cold. It is heart that warms. Do not govern only by documents and clauses. Govern also with compassion. In that way, you may restore the honor of Rosewood." Lytton inclined his head gravely. "Madame Vale," Poirot said next, "you play with scandal as though it were a fan, to flutter and amuse. But scandal is fire. Warmth it may give, but also destruction. Take care, madam, that you do not burn those you claim to befriend." She laughed softly, but her eyes flickered with something almost like unease. "To you, Mademoiselle Clara, I say this, your ink is powerful. Words are daggers, but also shields. Use them wisely. Do not become the prisoner of your own diary. Live, child. Live beyond the shadow of another woman's commands." Clara, her eyes wide, clutched the book to her breast, as though hearing for the first time that she possessed a life of her own. "And you, Wilcox," Poirot said, turning to the gardener at the back, "tend your roses. They are your truth. Do not let one crimson bloom, misused by vanity, ruin all that you have grown. Life, like roses, is stronger than crime." The man nodded, rough hands twisting his cap. Poirot drew himself up, his eyes shining. "And now I speak of Lady Eleanor. She sought control over her family, her fortune, her garden, even her death. She feared confusion, and so she marked her glass with a ribbon. Yet it was her very desire for order that gave the murderer his chance. Pride, Immerse, is the flaw that undoes us. Pride blinds, pride mocks, pride tempts us to believe we are untouchable. And in the end, it was pride, hers and his, that brought death to Rosewood." The room was silent. Even Mrs. Vale did not smile now. Poirot's voice softened. "Remember this. Life is fragile. Order must be cherished, not imposed. Vanity destroys, but humility restores. It is not enough to prune the rose. One must understand it. Otherwise, its thorns will cut." He bowed then, formally, as though closing a ceremony. No one spoke. Each seemed absorbed in their own thoughts, the words striking home in ways both private and painful. Later, as we prepared to leave, I said quietly, "You speak like a priest, Poirot." They looked as though they had been judged. He smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, perhaps they were. Not by Hercule Poirot, but by themselves. I merely held up the mirror. And what they saw, eh bien, that is between them and their conscience. We left the manor as twilight gathered. Behind us, Rosewood stood serene, the roses glowing faintly in the dusk. Yet I felt, as we walked down the drive, that the house would never again be quite the same. The motor car carried us away from Rosewood along the winding lanes, its tires crunching over gravel and then humming on the smoother road. Behind us the manor receded, its stone glowing faintly in the evening sun, its gardens a blur of color. Yet I felt, as though by instinct, that its shadow still lay upon us. Poirot sat upright beside me, his small suitcase at his feet, his gloved hands folded neatly upon his knees. His expression was calm, but there was a faraway gleam in his eye. For a time we traveled in silence. The countryside spread wide about us, fields golden with ripening corn, hedgerows alive with sparrows, cottages standing neat and self-contained. At last I said, "It is over now, Poirot. Rathbone will be tried, Rosewood restored to its routine, and Beatrice will inherit. Why do you look as though the case still troubles you?" He adjusted a fold of his cuff with meticulous care. "Because, Hastings, a case is never only the crime. The crime is the stone dropped in the water, but the ripples, they travel outward, disturbing all. At Rosewood, the murderer is unmasked, yes. Justice will take its course. But the ripples continue. Beatrice inherits not only money but suspicion. Lytton holds power yet finds his reputation clouded. Clara bears her diary like a chain. Even the roses, innocent flowers, become stained in memory. It is not finished, mon ami. It never is." I frowned. "But surely justice is enough?" "Justice," Poirot said softly, "is a word for the law. But order, that is something higher. I restore order when I reveal the truth. Yet order in the heart, Hastings, that only each person may restore for himself." He paused, watching the hedgerows slip past. "It is pride, always pride. Lady Ashcombe's pride made her cling to control. Rathbone's pride turned wounded vanity into cruelty. Pride blinds us, makes us deaf to reason. And yet, what am I, Hercule Poirot, if not proud of my little gray cells?" His lips twitched, half amused, half rueful. "The difference, perhaps, is that I know my pride, and so I keep it in order. Vanity unchecked, Hastings, it is the most poisonous flower of all." I did not answer at once. His words hung in the air, mingling with the drone of the motor. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the road. I thought of Lady Eleanor's imperious figure, of Rathbone's confession, of Beatrice's trembling hands. Each had been caught, in one way or another, by the snares of pride. At last I said, "You speak as though the crime were a lesson, not only a puzzle." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui, mon ami. Every crime is both. The puzzle is for my vanity, to exercise the little gray cells. The lesson is for humanity, to remind us of our frailty. Without order, we are lost. And it is my task, always, to restore order where chaos intrudes." We rode on. The sky burned with the colors of evening, crimson and gold fading into blue. I watched the light change and thought of Rosewood's roses, their petals trembling in the dusk. When we reached the station, Poirot alighted with neat precision, his suitcase in hand. He glanced once more toward the horizon, then turned to me with quiet satisfaction. "Come, Hastings. Another garden tended, another weed uprooted. Until the next disturbance, we may rest." And with that, we boarded the train for London, leaving behind the manor, the roses, and the echoes of pride and poison. Yet even as the wheels clattered on the rails, I knew that Rosewood would not soon leave us. For Poirot had shown me that crime was never only an act, but a mirror held up to human vanity, and that, like the roses, vanity would bloom again. The train bore us steadily toward London, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to the thoughts that filled my mind. Evening descended, the windows showing fields fading into twilight, hedgerows slipping into shadow. Poirot sat opposite me, trim and composed as though he had just stepped out of his valet's hands. His suitcase rested neatly at his side, his hat upon the rack above. For a long while he was silent, his gaze fixed on some point far beyond the darkening countryside. At last I broke the stillness. So, Poirot, it ends. Another case solved, another murderer unmasked. Rosewood will, in time, return to its roses and its dinners, though the memory of Lady Eleanor will never be erased. Are you satisfied? Poirot leaned forward, his fingertips touching, his mustaches twitching gently. Satisfied? Perhaps. The truth is known, justice will be done. But satisfaction, mon ami, is a delicate thing. When I see the young Mademoiselle Beatrice, pale and trembling beneath the shadow of suspicion, I wonder. When I see the faithful Clara, fleeing with her diary as though words themselves were chains, I wonder. And when I see the proud Dr. Rathbone, undone not by ignorance but by vanity, I wonder still. Is there satisfaction in such ruin? None. There is only order restored, a garden pruned of its diseased bloom. But joy, Hastings? That is not the harvest of crime. I frowned. Yet you speak of order as though it were a kind of salvation. His eyes brightened. It is precisely that. Without order, there is chaos, suspicion without end, fear without limit. Truth is cruel, yes, but it is necessary. Only when each fact is in its place, when each lie is stripped away, can life proceed. In Rosewood, they may grieve, they may quarrel, they may whisper. But they will not be lost in doubt. They will know. That, Hastings, is the gift Hercule Poirot bestows. He smiled, smoothing an invisible crease from his cuff. It is not a small gift. I looked at him then, small, precise, absurdly neat in the swaying carriage, and I felt again the peculiar awe he so often inspired in me. You are extraordinary, Poirot, I said quietly. He inclined his head. I am what I am. And what I am, Hastings, is a man who uses the little gray cells. That is my vanity. But vanity tempered with discipline may serve. Vanity untempered. He paused, his eyes narrowing as though seeing again the crimson rose among the pale. That, mon ami, is poison. The train roared into a tunnel. For a moment the darkness pressed about us, then the light returned, faint and golden with evening. Poirot settled back, his eyes closing in contentment. The case is ended. We leave behind the roses of Rosewood, the pride, the poison, the thorns. Another garden awaits, another puzzle. But for now, Hastings, we rest. And as the train clattered on toward the city, I sat watching my friend, meticulous, enigmatic, triumphant. Rosewood faded behind us, but its lesson remained. That pride is deadly, vanity dangerous, and truth, however cruel, the only true bloom among poisoned petals.